So let's do, just as a little refresher of what we did last time, let's make this be the entry point, the main activity that we are coming into. Okay, so this is going to be our main thing. So what do we need to do for that to make that happen? Yeah, I think you're on the right point. Yeah, you're on the right track. Yeah, so if we wanted to make something else be the main activity, right? So let me, first of all, I'm going to close all, so start fresh, right? And we are working on Yamba. So what we're going to do is in the manifest file, we simply need to move those couple of lines of code, which we'll explain later on, shortly, when we talk about broadcast receivers. But we need to move these couple of lines of code, right, from status activity to timeline activity. So what I'll do is I'll make timeline activity be sort of the top one. I need to, since I'm closing it, I need to close it like this, right, so that I can move those lines into it, right? I'm gonna basically just take those lines of code and move them into that. Make sense? Okay, so that indeed will, if we start now Yamba, that indeed will make the timeline activity be the main entry point. However, that doesn't solve our problem. See, now I don't have the menu, and that's back to your question, how do we make the menu available in the other activities? So what did we say enables the menu? What were the steps to enable the menu? Right, so we had the on create options menu and on on options item selected. Yeah, so what we could do is one of the two things. If we wanted to make the menu available throughout, right, we could then put that menu in a base class and inherit that base class. That make sense? You guys understand what I mean by that? So we could make our own base class or not. So let me just, I'll do it like that, but just to kind of show you. So for example, I could have, so that code is right here in status activity, okay? And I had that code that says menu stuff, right? Remember those two methods, on create options menu and on options menu selected, right? So what I could do is, if I wanted to make this something that's available to everyone, I could put this in a base class, like this. I would create a new Java class, okay, and I'll call it. I can call it, for example, BaseActivity. So this is where we're going to put some common stuff. Okay, bam, BaseActivity, and now BaseActivity extends activity. Organize imports. Right. So basically, just to kind of draw what we're doing. So before we had an activity, okay, and then we had status update inherit from activity. Okay, that was our inheritance from before. So status update is a activity. Okay. Now what we're doing, we still have a status update. Okay, but we're saying let's have status update inherit from base activity. Okay. And then we'll have base activity inherit from activity, right? And now what we can have is we can also have our timeline activity inherit from base activity. So that way we can put the common stuff in here. Make sense? So that's all we're doing. So see now if I go to status activity, I can make status activity as opposed to extends activity. I can say extends base activity. Okay. So now I'm back at square one, right? And I can go to timeline activity and do the same thing and say timeline activity is not just activity, but it's our base activity. Organize imports. And now status activity, those couple of things that we had regarding menu, so the menu stuff, I can yank it out of here. I'm gonna cut all this stuff out, right? So it's gone. Save it, organize imports, save it. And then base activity now has all the menu stuff. In other words, menu stuff is now going to be available to everyone.
So without even base activity, we moved everything to the base activity.java.
Right.
And we started now, instead of all other classes subclassing from activity directly, they are now subclassing from base activity.
That's correct. Well, no, not specifically timeline and status activity.
What are we doing? All the menu stuff or something?
Yeah, I copied just the menu stuff.
You got
Yeah. Now it doesn't compile because it doesn't know what Yamba is, for example, right? So we're still not done, right? It doesn't compile.
So entire menu stuff you copied, cut and paste directly. That's it.
Yeah. Cut pasted. Yeah, I cut pasted the menu stuff. So those two functions, methods, right? The on create options menu and on options menu item selected. Yeah.
Actually, both status activity and timeline activity can now refer to the Yamba application object from base activity.
Well, they could. So that's the question. So now the question is, obviously this is not compiling because it doesn't know Yamba. I have two choices. I could say here, I could say Yamba application, get application, and kind of do it that way, right? So that would work, right? Or I can actually move the definition of Yamba from here, so cut it out of here, put it into the base activity, right? So that everyone who uses base activity now has it, right? And then I would need to also copy implement the on create method in base activity so that we actually implement, define Yamba. So that thing that we did here now doesn't need to go here. So I'm going to yank it and I'm going to put it into this place here. So now Yamba is defined in base activity, and it's as such available to everyone else who subclasses it, right?
And we also took out from everywhere else.
Yeah, so I don't need to define it here. And I actually noticed that there's one place that we did not use, like for example here, this becomes obsolete as well. Because now I have Yamba, so I can just refer to Yamba here, right?
Can you show the on create of status activity?
So on create on status activity stays the same. I just took out that one line where we defined, yeah. So timeline activity is now broken, and let's see what the problem is. This needs to be public on create, and see, timeline activity now doesn't need Yamba anymore, doesn't need it because it inherits it. That just makes it a little simpler. Tiny bit simpler, but still simpler. Right? So basically what we've done is we moved, so BaseActivity is now where we keep the common stuff, and the common stuff that we keep is Yamba, so Yamba application and options menu, right? So now everyone else that inherits from it, namely timeline activity and status activity, are getting that from BaseActivity. But since BaseActivity is a activity, they still get all that stuff from there, right? So that's the two kind of things that we, the Yamba app stuff and the options menu stuff. Hard to read, but that's what it says here. Got it? So that is the common stuff. So you can kind of see it. So that's the Yamba app, and we define it here, right? No big deal. And then the menu stuff is the menu stuff that we define below.
And we also copied, and then we need to remove these things also from there.
Yeah.
How do you look for a term? How do you search in this thing?
Control F or Apple F, that usually works. Yeah, for search.
So,
Right. So on timeline activity, if we had this one be protected, but if we're subclassing from this guy, and this guy is defined public. So if this one was defined protected, okay, then this one could be protected as well. Right. It's just that we can't make something more visible. You can make it less visible. We can make it more visible. Right. So yeah, either one is fine. So yeah. But if
Protected is visible to the children, right?
I'm sorry?
Protected is visible to the children.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
so on
So-
status activity,
So the key was if you want to, if on create in BaseActivity was public, then subclasses would need to be at least public. At least, and at most, it's in this case the same because you can't have more visible than public, right? But if it's protected, then subclass could be protected, at least protected, but it could also be public, right?
so I'm making all public.
Sure, that's fine. For our purposes, that's fine.
The security kind of tightens.
Yeah, it makes it a little tighter, yes. Okay, so we now at least have a placeholder to put all the common stuff in, right? So now if I run this, I should start with my timeline activity, and it should have a menu support. However, what's going to happen is, yes, we now have a menu, but we don't have a menu for the to jump into status. Yes. Right. So we need to add yet another menu support, in this case for status.
Right, so it could be universally.
Exactly. So your job is to create menu support for status. How do you do that? Right. So we're gonna start by updating our menu XML, not layout, but menu XML, and we already added 5 things. So you know, what's yet another one to add, right? No big deal. So another item, and just like before, item status, right? Title matters. I think I already have title for status update, title status update. It may be too long, but we'll see how it pans out. And then icon is going to be a tough one to figure out, and I'm going to visit my website called Android Drawables, and it's the Screaming Penguin, which directs us to this. And then I'm looking for some kind of IC menu something, right? Because IC menu are the icons that fit very well in the menu. There's like email, IC. What's that? So for example, IC menu compose may be a good one, right? Let's see. So at Android drawable / IC menu compose, right? Except this one doesn't work because this resource is actually not public. So we cannot use IC menu compose. It's not available to us. What we could do in this case is, if you really truly want to use it, you can always copy this image and put it into your resource. But I could use something like IC menu edit. Let's try that one.
When you publish,
yeah, then. So if I clean this, so IC menu edit seems to work. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reformat it here so that my XML looks good, and then I'm gonna actually move it above, so it's gonna be right next to the timeline. So the order matters, right? So I'm gonna start with timeline, then followed by status update, followed by preferences, followed by start stop service, and so on and so on. Rerun it and see what happens. Menu, bam, status update, perfect. It looks good, right? Except we don't have the handling for that menu, right? So now what we need to do is we need to handle that menu, right? So to do that, what are we gonna do? Exactly. So now we go to BaseActivity and we add, and here order doesn't matter, right? So here we add yet another r.id and then item status update. No status. Notice how remember how I said this list is gonna grow, right? So that's why you want to kind of be mindful of what you put in there, how you name it. So that's why it's relatively easy to find stuff, right? And you can say start activity, new intent, this comma status activity dot class. And that's it, right? And that should work now. So the ordering in XML is going to determine, yeah, the order of this. So this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, and so on, right? So so that's the order of those things. So that correlates to the order of these items here. Or if you want, you can look at it like this. You can even take it here and like move it up and down. Just be careful, because if you move it, check this out. If I move it up, first it moves it into some one of these, so it becomes sort of this like parent-child relationship, and then you gotta move it up yet again, so down, down. So you gotta do basically twice to move it one up. So that's why I prefer to just do it in XML, but you can use it this WYSIWYG tool as well.
I think what would be cool to do is, you know, the menu options, you have start service and stop service. So if the service has already been started, then it's kind of highlighted and you can press on it again. You know, so we don't keep hitting it, you know, thinking that it's not working.
That's a good point. So so thank you. So that's a great point. So let's another homework for you guys. Let's switch what the menu looks like in case that that you know that the menu changes. How would you do that? So what if we wanted to change we wanted to toggle what this looks like. So if the service is already running, we're gonna say stop service. If it's
Toggle button or something.
I'm sorry?
I guess it should be something like a toggle button. Maybe
Okay, so how would you do that? How would you merge these two into one that's intelligent?
Well, in the switch statement, right, you can check if service is running, and you can do start service not disabled. So with the button
You
numbers.
can like keep a flag or something, and you can set or reset the flag inside the particular switch in the case statement.
Right. So we already have a flag. Remember. So cool. Okay. So let's So let's do that. So that's our next exercise. So how do we now do that? So first of all, remember we already have a flag. It's just that the flag we have, it's inside. For me, it's inside of is running, right? Right. So where would you? What would be a better place to put this flag?
BaseActivity.
You can just do a getter for this, right?
Yeah, but how would you get? How would you have your service? How would you get? Let me bring the picture back up. Let's say this. Oh, what happened? So let me open up the our pictures. Android out. Bootcamp. Oh no, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this image. So if this is our picture, so this guy internally knows if it's running or not. But now we have a base activity, which is sort of the parent of these two. How do we have this base activity access that guy to check if it's running or not? What's a common, brings back the question of how do we communicate between various components, right?
Is there some concept like notify associated with them, which can notify?
We could do that, but in this case, we could also just move this flag up to the Yamba application. Because they both have access to Yamba application, right? Right. So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Yamba application and I'll move the flag here. I'll say public. I'll say doesn't have to be public. It can be just default visibility. But Boolean is service running, and I'll set it to false. Okay. Right. And then update our service as opposed to using this flag. So I'm going to delete it, which creates a whole bunch of problems. Then I'll simply say Yamba dot is service running is true. Right. So whatever I had reference to is running, I'm just replacing with the Yamba is service running.
Why did you like make it private and then add a task or something and then add a method saying get is running and then call that?
I'm sorry?
So instead of making is running public
Yeah.
in Yamba application, you could have made it private and then added a method.
Setters and gathers. Yeah, you could do that. That would be the more. Yeah, you could do that as well. In Android, that would be the proper way in sort of OOP to basically make it private here.
That's how we have done it in operating systems.
Sure. So I could make this private. Okay. Now in Android, this is a rule that we often break, but I could make this private, and then what I could do is in my Yamba application, I would say source generate setters and getters, right? And I would say for each service running, I would generate public, and I'll do it at the end.
What did you get this one? General?
So yeah, so basically that creates your setters and getters, right? That's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I could have done that, save that, organize import, save that, and then here, as opposed to saying is running, I would say set is running to true. I could, you know what? I don't like the name. Get is running. Oh, so is service running and set is service running. Okay, that's name. That's good. Is service running? So this becomes just a function call or a method. So I would say here yamba dot set service running to false, and then this becomes obsolete, and that's that, right? So we are done updating that. So actually I do have an error right here. So it's not updated is service running, but it's Yamba dot, but except this one doesn't know what Yamba is. So I need to move Yamba from updater up to the service, right? Make it higher visibility. So I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna add it here. So hold on 1 second. Let me just yank this out and move that to my own create. So that's my Yamba, and so now this becomes, as opposed to update, it becomes Yamba dot is service running, and then one more Yamba dot is service running. There we go. So that compiles. Sorry, you were saying? So just to kind of like recap, I mean, whenever I refactor, I kind of lose you guys because I'm going up and down the code a lot. But don't try to copy it. You're gonna get lost. Okay, it's not gonna work if you're trying to copy it. This is not a typing exercise. Fundamentally, what we're doing is we're just shifting the variable, right? So as opposed to before, it was just a flag that was living inside of this inner class called updater, right? We had something is running. I moved that all the way up to Yamba. So Yamba now has a private variable set is service running, right? Make sense? And setters and getters, so I can actually access that variable. Since it's private, I need setters and getters to access it. This is just to be a proper OOP code, but to me, I would have skipped these steps. So in the interest of making the code shorter, okay? It's breaking the OOP principles, but it's something that we do in Android all the time. It's just it's pretty common to access variables directly, as opposed to worry about this. You know, I find the setters and getters, if they're just straightforward, they're not adding any value, they're just noise to me. That's how I see it, but you can argue that all day long, right? But nonetheless, I did them. So there they are, setters and getters. So now updater service is simply has Yamba reference to Yamba application. references it here, okay, and then what we are doing is we're just asking Yamba now, is it running or not. So it's the same flag, it's just that I moved it up to the mothership as opposed to keeping it local, okay. So the way you should do this is you should try to understand it, and you should try to then fix errors by using your tool. Okay, so try to figure out, like, click on your tool, figure out what's going on, as opposed to just trying to like copy paste, because it's, you know, for me, because it's not gonna get you far. It's confusing, especially when I'm moving between 2-3 files and doing it, you know, across like the screen and so on. Okay. So let me know if I can help you with that. Okay, so now that we have that, we have the you know, is running as part of the Yamba application, what we can do is we can change how the menu works so that we only have one menu for these two things, right? Right? Make sense? So as opposed to having start service, stop service, I'm going to have one that says toggle service or something like that, right? So I'm going to go to menu, and I'm actually I'm gonna create a new menu item, and then I'll comment out the other two, right? So I'm gonna say item toggle service, right? And by default it could be the initial one's title start service, and it could be the icon same as a start service initially, right? Make sense? So let me comment these two out. So I'm gonna reformat, and then service start and service stop, these two I'm going to comment out. Okay, so they're commented out, so they don't appear. So we have menu, status, prefs, purge, and toggle service, right? Make sense? Look, I just simply deleted or commented out start stop service, and I created a new one which is basically identical to start service. Just change the name. Just because start service is not applicable as a name, it's a bad name now, right? So as opposed to calling it start service, I call it toggle service, right? So that's it. Right, so now that we have the toggle service, so now this is no longer you know, no longer applicable, right? So basically, as opposed to start and stop service, I'm now gonna have dot toggle, item toggle service, and then I can now ask myself, you know, if Yamba dot is service running, right? So if service is running, then we're gonna stop service, right? Else we're going to start service. So that was easy. So we just basically change it. So now we basically say, okay, we know that this one button got clicked, toggle service, right? And that's gonna start stop service. And as a matter of fact, if I run it, this should work right now. It's not gonna look good, but it's gonna work. So let's see, because we have our tracking. Okay. So timeline activity created. So look, if I go menu, so this is now, it says start service, but it's really my toggle service, right? So there, it started the service, bam, bam, update running, right? It ran. But now if I press that button again, which mistakenly says still start service, now it actually does stop, right? So it does do what we meant it to do. It's just that it doesn't update the UI. Right? So how would we now programmatically change this to update the UI? Because right now it should say toggle, and it should like swap between start and stop, right?
Can programmatically change the title by using the ID of them?
Right. So, but in what method and where?
Say in this case statement itself, until it use R dot whatever dot.
So this is going to get called when menu options item is selected. This one is going to get called only first time when menu is being opened, when menu is being created. So we need to figure out if there's another hook that we can have to handle menus. And let's go into override implement methods and kind of see there. It's going to be something to do with on, right? Because they all start with on something something, right? On menu opened. Okay, so if you don't have enough documentation here, alternatively you could look at d.android.com, right? So so I would look inside of activity and I would look at what's available. So again, I'm looking for on menu stuff. On menu open, called when a panel's menu is opened by the user. On options menu created, closed, on prepare options menu. Displayed or on. Okay, so this one may be the one that we want. On menu open, called when panel's menu is opened by the user. This may also be called when the menu is changing from one type to another. For example, from one icon menu to an expanded menu. That's maybe the one that we want, right? So now we get the menu, right? So now what I can do is I can implement this method on menu opened, right? And programmatically toggle in there. So I'm gonna add it. So there's my new code for on menu opened. Right? Let's see, what does it say? Called on panels is open. Feature the panel that menu is in. The menu that is opened. Default implementation returns true. Okay, so we're just gonna return true. Okay, feature, we don't care about this, but we do care. We now have the menu, but we need that menu item because we want to flip that toggle from one to another depending on what it is, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say menu item toggle item is gonna be menu dot, and then let's see how we can find in menu that item. What do we have in here?
View, find view from ID.
Is there a find view? Get item. Or find item. Find item takes the ID, so it's gonna be r dot menu dot r dot id dot id dot item toggle service. Bam. So this should give me the menu item, right? The find item returns menu item. That's correct. So no cast necessary. So now I have that toggle item, and now I need to figure out what to set it to. So I can say if Yamba is service running, then we're gonna set it to one thing, else we're gonna set it to another thing, right? So if service running is, we're gonna say toggle item dot set. Which things did we care about? Set title, right? Remember, so now what we are doing is we're basically programmatically changing what we did manually here, right? So we manually here set title and set icon, right? Now we're programmatically going to flip-flop those two things, right? Make sense? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying set title to r dot string dot, and I already have all the titles created. So if service is running, then I'm going to set titles to title service stop, right? And and the other one that we cared about was, if you remember, the other one that we cared about was the icon. So, right? So I'm going to say toggle item dot set. Toggle item dot set and then icon. Okay, and so now the question is, what is the icon that we're gonna point to? What's that?
It's grayed out, right?
Yes, but well, no. I want to flip flop. I want to flip flop between, you know, if service is running, then I'm gonna point to stop service icon, which is the little pause. If it's not running, then I'm gonna point to the play. But how do I point to this thing? Because if it was our local resource, we would do r.drawable dot, right? But in this case, it's not our local resource; it's an Android drawable. So how do we point to that? Have you seen this before? We haven't. So just like if you want to use, so just like our at string points to our own values here, string, right? Points to our own something in here, right? And just like and at Android drawable points to the system one, right? Similarly, to access this from Java, you would say r.string, and similarly to access system one, as opposed to doing r.drawable, you say android.r.drawable. And you guys have sort of seen that android.r sneak on at you when you had a problem with your r not existing and you do organize imports. Yes. So I mentioned that as a common problem, right? So here it would be android.r.drawable dot, and then IC dot IC media. So if we run, it's running, I'm gonna say pause, right? And then if it's not running, I'm just gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna say play and all that, right? Bam. So title becomes title service. So if it's stop start, right? And then as opposed to IC media play, I'll say IC media play. Bam. So this should toggle. So if our service is running, we're gonna show one thing. If it's not running, we're gonna show another thing. So let's see how that works. So if I click on menu, so it's start service, and let's see here on the on this. So start service, bam, starts the service. Okay, service started running, blah blah blah. But if I click menu, now it's a stop service. So if I click stop service, it stops it, right? So start. So this also gives us an indicator if service is running or not. So it's a much better UI, right? So for that, just to kind of summarize, what we needed to do is we needed to move some of the responsibility of is service running or not up to the Yamba application, because that's a place where we can share the data between all the various components, right? So that's the first thing we did. We moved the responsibility up to Yamba application. Next, in our base activity, we said let's programmatically now change the menu. So I kind of wanted to add this to the mix because remember, we've done all the menu stuff using XML, but you could have also done it using Java, right? Ultimately, XML becomes Java, right? So this was a good example of how, okay, we now programmatically find that toggle item, and then we figure out its title and icon programmatically, which is equivalent of what we did statically here by writing it into this line items here.
So in the updater service is where you're actually updating the running state?
Yeah, so the updater service will update its state. So on start, it will figure out, it will, is service running? Yeah.
Who sets?
Yeah, so we do it here when we actually stop the thread. So we do it here when we stop the thread. So we set it to true, right? So yeah, we're doing it in a very much inside of the thread. So yeah, so that way you can't have a runaway thread. We would know about that, right? So we're not doing it in the controls of. We're not doing it in here. Or here, but we're rather doing it inside of the actual updater, which is the thread that actually does the update. So that is the that's basically the toggle, adding the toggle feature to in the base activity, right? So that gives us that button now simplified a little bit, and it gives us timeline activity that we can click on. Okay. Now here's another problem that I have. Check this out. If I go timeline activity, menu, status update, menu, timeline activity, menu, status update. I mean, it works, right? But check out the back button. Bam, 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 right? So there's a lot of stuff on there. You see the problem? Well, so it depends on what you would expect. I would expect just to flip-flop between activities, not to restack them on top of each other. Right? Did you guys follow? Not really. Okay. So let me, from a user standpoint, right? Okay. So let me do this again. So if I start the updater service. Alright, so I'm starting it from scratch, brand new, just started. So no, going back to home brings me back to home, which is what I expect, right? So now if I go and restart it from the task manager, right? So I restart my Yamba application. There it is. So now I'm going to go to status activity. And I say to myself, I don't really want the status activity, I want the timeline activity. Now if I go back, that's exactly what's going to happen. But what if I didn't go back? So I went status activity, now I use a menu and say timeline activity. Okay? So now what I have on my stack is, look at this, back, back. I have it like multiple times. Right? You see the problem? Okay, so how do we solve this problem? So basically what we want to do is we want to, yes, we could override what the back button does, that's one option. But the other option is also we can specify how we are starting an activity, how we are sending an intent, in other words. So let's look at intent and see what options we have, because we're now exploring intents a little more. So there's a way to specify a flag for the intent, right? So when we are creating an intent, let me show you. So there are certain flags we can specify. So let's see. Flag activity brought to front. This flag is not normally set by application code, but is set for you by the system as described in the launch mode. Flag activity clear top. If said the activity being launched is already running in the current task, then instead of launching a new instance of that activity, all of the other activities on top of it will be closed, and this will be delivered to the top as a new intent. So that's one option. Flag activity clear when task reset. If set marks a point task activity that they should be cleared when the task is reset. Exclude from recent, forward result, multiple task, new task will become the start of a new task of this history stack. So there are basically various flags that we can attach to this, right? If set is an intent pass to start activity, flag will cause the launched activity to be brought to the front of its task history stack if it's already running. So so these are various ways we can basically control that. I think the one that I used before is flag reorder to front. So if set is an intent pass to activity, this flag will cause the activity to be brought to the front of its tasks history stack. Single if set activity will not be launched if it is already running at the top of the history stack. So that the activity will not be launched if it's already running. Exactly. So that may be good. That may also make sense to do, because if it's already running, we don't want. So in other words, look, check this out. So I don't want this. So oops, me. So if I am here and I go menu, timeline. Whoa, just launched it again, right? Right. So how do we do that? How do we attach these intents? So we can basically, where we're firing these intents is here, right? So I could, for example, when I do dot timeline, I could set add flag, right? And I could add a flag, you know, one of those intent dot flag activity single. You said single top, right? Right. So that is definitely one thing that we could do, so that if it's already running, that one would not be started, right? But we could also do add flag, because I can add more flags, right? I can say intent dot flag activity bring to front or reorder to front, right? And so on. So for example, that makes sense for this one. For the other one that we had status, I may just add reorder to front, and for preference I may just say reorder to front, something like that, right? Reformat, run it. Let's see what happens this time around. So if I do menu and I say timeline, nothing, right? So if I go menu timeline again, it's not going to go back. See, back goes to home, which is exactly what you want. So that's good. Okay. So Yamba. So now if I say menu status, okay, I say menu status, back brings me back here, which is what I want, right? But if I go, so that's test 2. Let's see, menu status, and now menu timeline. So if I go back, brings me status, which is fine. So I'm pretty happy with this behavior. Okay, did you guys get that? So you can basically control what. There's a concept of a task, right? Like, you know, user is doing a bunch of stuff. You can kind of and all these activities are getting stacked on top of each other. So you can control what the behavior of that start a new activity. Is it going to start a brand new one, or is it going to bring the existing one back to this, right?
What were the flags again?
So we now have all this in a base activity, right? So what I did is I just attached a couple of flags, like single top and reorder to front were the ones that I chose. But there are a whole bunch of flags, and you would find their behavior. You know, you would see what they do by going into the intent section of the documentation, right? Make sense? Everyone happy with this? I'll let you catch up with this. So before we had this static, right? So everything here in the menu was defined statically inside of our menu.xml, right? So now, and I had one button for start, one button for stop. We said, how about we have a single button, and then we dynamically, keyword dynamically, figure out which icon to use. So I just simply renamed stop into toggle, right? So since it's not a start, it's not a stop, it's both, depending, right? So I had to kind of change the name. So you get rid of stop and rename start to toggle, and you're done, okay? And then inside of the base activity, we did the research to figure out which callback gets called, and we said, aha, on menu open is called, you know, so yeah, I could put here, you know, called every time. Well, it's not our method, so I'm not going to use the Java doc because that's improper, but just as a reminder, called every time menu is opened, right? So that gives us an opportunity to dynamically now change that toggle button. So I find it, just like this line is the same concept as we did in find view by ID, right? So we find that, and then I figure out, okay, what should we show? Should we show play or pause, right? So I say, okay, is the service running? If it's running, then I show stop, pause, right? If it's not running, I show play, right? That's all that this did. Yeah. So what we did, is we made base activity the mother of timeline activity, right? And status activity. So both status activity and timeline activity are now children of base activity, and we moved common stuff into here, so which includes all the menu stuff, so that now both timeline and status have access to this, as well as we give it the access to Yamba, so that, you know, just simplified it so that anyone then can just say Yamba dot as opposed to find it and all that. Yeah, so that's sort of, and as I said, I drew it as, you know, we now have activity, right, and then base activity, right, as a subclass of that, and then we have our status activity as a subclass of that, right, like that, and then we have our timeline activity as a subclass of that, right? So that's what we did there.
Can you just scroll down? I just want to see what you put in base activity.
What I put in a base activity? So like I said, Yamba, and then on create just gets Yamba, right? And then all the menu stuff, which includes, you know, on create options items, on options items selected, and the new one, which is on open menu items, right? So that's basically what we did. So, and like I said, this one, you know, called only once first time menu is created. Menu button is clicked on, right? Creates the menu, right? And this one is called every time user clicks on a menu item, right? That's it. So that is what our base activity looks like. So for
How do you access the Android results?
well, I didn't. You might have used the API for a text, but I actually, so this, like we said, set icon sets the icon. In this case, we are pointing to a system-wide R. So the only difference is, as opposed to saying R dot, you're saying Android.R dot. So that's the only difference when you're referring to the system-wide resources. So you just use the Android.R dot. Everything else is the same. Okay, so this basically summarizes the entire base. So we refactor right now a whole bunch of stuff in this base class. So you guys learn about how to do that. This is more or less just object-oriented programming, not so much Android stuff, right? But this was very much an Android thing. Menus. How do you handle menus dynamically, right? and it brings back the whole thing of like, look, we're just inflating XML and then we can do modifications in Java as much as we want. And another thing that was new here was also how we handled the menu stuff by attaching various flags to our intents, right? But that was something also that was sort of new, because so far we just used intents as a plain old, like just sending an intent. We weren't really thinking about that too much. Okay, so that basically we now refactor our code to look pretty decent. So keeping it whole and complete. Okay. So we're going to take a break now, and then after the break we are going to do broadcast receivers. Woohoo! Sounds good?